Hello, everybody. My name is Dipsy Olusufeshe, and I will be moderating the webinar today. I want to say a massive welcome to everybody. This event, Who Does Domestic Abuse Affect?, is part of 16 days of action to end gender-based violence. Kent Integrated Domestic Abuse Service have 16 events running between now and 10th of December to inform, educate, and inspire action so that we can make domestic abuse everybody's business. Because domestic abuse is everybody's business and everyone can make a difference, which is just what you're doing by attending today. So thank you, everybody. Hopefully you have all viewed the videos that were sent out in advance for this session, and I would like to thank our speakers for taking the time to pre-record this for us. This event is a 60-minute question and answer session to our panel members. During the event, you are able to use the Q&A text box on your screen to ask questions for any of our speakers. As your moderator today, I will publish my colleague Louisa Joan. She's also from Look Ahead, from the Learning and Development team. I would just want you to say thank you for Louisa for stepping in at the very, very last minute to be a wonderful help for us today. So my wonderful colleague Louisa will be publishing all your questions. So I believe most of us have watched the video from yesterday. Kindly put the name of the panel from one of the panel on the question you are asking. So as your moderator, if you would like to ask a question of a specific speaker, please preface your question with the speaker name in bold. So if you have a question for Amy, you will put Amy's name there. If you have a question for Meena, you put Meena's name there, or David. So I will be introducing our wonderful panelists. Meanwhile, I will also just want to note that your email confirmation shows the webinar as slightly longer, so we don't get cut off on the system. You can use the thumbs up just to underneath a question to upvote if that's something you would like to ask too. If you would like to follow up on a question, please preface it with the questions follow up. So that just leaves me with the wonderful job of introducing our panel. Our first panelist is Meena Kumari. Let me say a few words about Meena. Meena Kumari is the founder and director of H.O.P.E Training and Consultancy. H.O.P.E means helping other people every day. H.O.P.E was established by Meena Kumari in 2008 and has trained a number of professionals in a variety of safeguarding subjects. Meena has a great passion and commitment towards campaigning, raising awareness, and working with professionals to ensure that domestic abuse, sexual violence, and safeguarding is always at the forefront. There are more information about Meena and is available on the speaker's bio. Our second panelist for today is McCarthy. McCarthy is a professor in learning disabilities at the Tizard Center, University of Kent. She has extensive research experience on projects relating to the personal and private life of adults with learning disabilities. In particular, she has an interest in working with women with learning disabilities around issues relating to sexuality and relationships. She has researched domestic violence against women with learning disabilities and published widely in this field. So if you have any question for Michelle, kindly put a name in front of it. Our third member of panel is Amy McLeod. Amy is the head of safeguarding for H.O.P.E, where she is responsible for the safe delivery of services and the reduction of risks to the beneficiaries of the charity services, volunteers, and staff. Prior to working in the charity sector, Amy managed a local safeguarding adults board where she encouraged and supported partner organizations to work collaboratively to identify risks and implement joint projects to prevent harm to adults at risk. She also commissioned and managed safeguarding adult reviews, enabling lessons to be identified and improvement in practice to be made. If you have, or you want more information about Amy, it's available also on the speaker's bio. I've got the wonderful panel, member of the panel, Marilyn Selwood. Let me say a few words about Marilyn. Marilyn has been involved in domestic abuse services for around 18 years. She began by working with the local DA outreach service and Avon Somerset Police to create a survivor group called SEEDS, with funding from the Evaluation Trust. Marilyn delivered training and presentations to organizations such as Yarlington Housing Association, Devon and Somerset Fire Rescue Service, Avon and Somerset Police, CPS and Somerset County Council. Marilyn has also worked with Government Office of the Southwest as a survivor voice for the VOG strategy. Help me to welcome Marilyn as member of the panel. Now, Jessica Rees is not able to be here today, so our wonderful David Naylor will be speaking in place of Jessica during the QA as she's unable to attend. Now, let me tell you wonderful things about David Naylor. David Naylor joined Victim Support in 2015 to become the area manager for Victim Support, the leading independent charity working with people affected by crime. David Naylor is the contract account manager for Victim Support. In Kent and Medway, David's role is to lead the strategic development of the organization across the areas and to build strong partnership with agencies working in the same field. Before joining Victim Support, David worked in London as the director for partnership with a charity focused on health inequalities, and before moving to London, was based in New York, working in the field of corporate relocations. Thank you very much, member of the panel. And I don't think I've introduced myself. My name is H.O.P.E, and I also work with Look Ahead. I work with women and children in the refuge, and I support them, to advocate for them, to make informed decisions and to have a healthy lifestyle to move on in their lives. If you want to know more about me, quickly head up to the website and you read more about me. Thank you. So I'm now leaving you to this wonderful panel as you post your questions. Like I said, if you have any question for those who have watched the webinar and the pre-recorded one, can you kindly text your questions? And I think I've got some questions already popping up. If you have seen any question and you think, wow, I like this question, I want it to be raised, kindly upvote it by clicking that one. And before I move on, may I just say, if anyone feels they need to speak with someone, there is a contact number that will pop up with a message, and you can, yeah, that is it. The Kaidas one, the 0808 1689 111, and you can visit the website. You can click on the cross at the top right-hand corner to take it off your screen as this wonderful panel begins to answer our wonderful questions. So my first question is, this goes for Professor Michelle. How do you help a woman or man with learning disability that can recognize or understand domestic abuse due to their learning disabilities and they can't make informed decisions? Thank you.
Okay, well that's a great question, and it's not an easy question, but I'll give it a go. I mean, I suppose if people are unaware that they're being abused, then there are a number of conversations that need to take place with them. Perhaps a place to start might be, I mean, you need to consider, has the person, for example, ever had any kind of sex and relationships education? Have those kind of conversations ever taken place with the person? Because if they haven't, then they're not really in a good position to understand what relationships could be like and should be like, and therefore to determine whether the one that they're in is abusive. So there would be conversations about good and bad relationships and what they look like and how you can tell one from the other, good and bad touch, and what that's like, and how you can determine one from the other, what's okay and what's not okay, and why. Well, those kind of baseline conversations need to take place. Now, clearly, if the person has such a severe learning disability that they're not able to have those kind of conversations, then and they can't really understand that, you know, that kind of context, chances are they're unlikely to be living independently, and that, you know, it's possibly unlikely that they'll even be in that kind of relationship in the first place. So the people with learning disabilities, as far as we're aware, who can be in those kind of intimate partner relationships where domestic abuse is taking place, do tend to be those at the more able end of the learning disability spectrum, and therefore who you could have those kind of conversations with. But if they're not, and if they are more at the severe end, then they will have other people around them, you know, often members of staff who are kind of supporting them and caring for them, who need to look out for them and actually, you know, needs to try and make sure that they're safe. Now, if somebody is a vulnerable adult, then you can make an adult safeguarding referral for that person for any kind of harm that they might be experiencing, and domestic abuse obviously would come into that. So, I mean, that's one thing that you do.
Thank you. Is there any other member of panel that want to contribute to that? Okay, I'll go straight to the next question. And this question is for Marilyn. In your experience, are there key things to consider in a men's refuge which may be different to a women's refuge? That's a very good question. Marilyn, are you there? Marilyn, are you there?
It looks like she might be frozen. Her picture's frozen.
Yeah. Okay. The next question is also for Marilyn, but I will skip it until we're able to get Marilyn back. So this question is for you, Meena. Do you think the new DA bill will improve understanding of and responses to forced marriage?
Sorry, I was muted. So the first thing, so I totally welcome the domestic abuse bill. It's something that the sector have been contributing now for a number of months, and we're still waiting for, and hopefully we will get a bit of an outcome kind of next year. So people kind of look out for some of the bits that will be coming out in January, and hopefully by April 2021, we should have kind of that statutory definition in place, as long as a number of things. I suppose the key thing is we have a very clear forced marriage definition as well. We also know that forced marriages is a criminalised offence. We know that there's offences also linked to it. And we know the breach of a forced marriage protection order is also a criminal offence. I think in the domestic abuse bill, what they really talk a lot about also is that statutory definition of DA, but also focusing on that emotional, coercive and controlling, but also that economic abuse, which we know links into forced marriages so well. And I think one of the key things that I've been trying to say to practitioners on the ground is the links between forced marriages, honour-based abuse, but also coercive and controlling behaviour. So it's really making sure that we really understand the links, but also understanding the offences that are attached to it, and kind of the history and what we know about forced marriages. So for those that have watched the presentation that I've done, I've been really clear kind of why they are so different to arranged marriages, the history, and kind of why people do what they do. So the domestic abuse bill definitely has parts which I welcome. However, if you do look into the bill a little bit more, if you are a migrant woman, so if you think about some of the things that Southall Black Sisters and some of the other agencies have been leading on, such as ICRO and HALO, if you are a migrant woman and you are here and you don't have access to certain rights, the bill at the moment is not suitable for you. So for migrant women in particular, we need to be doing a lot more.
Okay. Oh, thank you. Thank you so much, Meena, for that. Thank you. Marilyn, I can see you're back.
Hurrah, thank you.
Welcome, welcome. So I've got a question for you, Marilyn. Are you ready to take the question now?
Yeah.
Good. Right. The question for you is, In your experience, are there key things to consider in a men's refuge which may be different to a women's refuge?
Yes, so just to sort of give an overview of accommodation for men, there are very few refuges for men, and most of them tend to be safe house accommodation, so houses where men are living independently and not in the same communal environment as a refuge. But those refuges, they tend to be for very sort of smaller numbers. There's a lot less support in there on the whole, because they aren't funded in the same way, or there's not as many of them throughout the country. But I don't think there's anything specifically in terms of the support that men receive. I don't think it's any different than female survivors would want and need whilst they're in refuge. I think it needs to be the same. Obviously, they may need additional support around having child contact, because the majority of men that flee don't take their children with them. So that's something else that they would need to address. And if they're working and need to go into refuge, in the same way as a female survivor that's going into refuge, they would need to obviously consider how they're going to afford to pay for that refuge whilst they're in there if they are not entitled to housing benefit or universal credit. Other than that, I don't think it's massively different. The only thing is obviously the amount of male refuge spaces or safe house spaces. So to our knowledge, there's about 204 bed spaces nationally for men, and only 40 of them are specifically for men. The rest of them can be accessed by both men and women. So on an average week, when we do our ring around at Mankind on a Monday, we only have around 6 or 7 spaces available for men throughout the country.
Wow. I work in the women's refuge, and we have women with children. And I am hoping one day there will be also a man's refuge, because we have a lot of men who are, having parental rights and are the one having their children with them. So I think same opportunities should be given to men as well, if we're trying to. Yeah.
There are some refuges that allow obviously men and their children, but far fewer than obviously for females.
All right, good. Thank you so much. Now, this next question is for you again, Marilyn. Can you outline what helps to create an effective and supportive male refuge? I think it's kind of same, but
I think obviously good support. I think it's having a good safety plan in place and a good support plan in place for the men that are staying there, and the same as you would a female. Making sure that they have access to other services. Making sure that they understand what refuge is going to be like. I think refuge is a bit of an eye-opener for anybody when they go in. And as I said, the majority of spaces for men are safe house spaces, so they won't necessarily have support in that building. It may be that they have support via telephone or something else, so not as frequently. So it's making sure that support is right in the very early days, and that they have clear expectations around what's available to them.
Okay. Well, thank you so much, Marilyn. That's really, really empowering. Thank you. Now, the next question says Jessica, but like I said earlier, for those who are joining after, our wonderful David Naylor will be taking the question for Jessica. So this question is for you, David. How much is DA and the impact of DA recognized amongst the LGBTQ? Apologies for those who doesn't understand what DA is. DA is domestic abuse. So how much is domestic abuse and the impact of domestic abuse recognized among the LGBT community?
And to build on the acronym CITY, LGBTQ+, so those people that may not be aware, that's lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, questioning or queer, and plus will cover others, which could be intersex, asexual as well. I'd have to say it's a picture that probably does reflect the larger community. If we look back 10 years, things may have been a little bit different. I think within our community, we would recognize when domestic abuse is taking place in the same way as with heterosexual or cisgendered relationships. And that means that some people will recognize that they are experiencing domestic abuse. Some people won't. Some people will have family members that will recognize that domestic abuse is taking place and offer support. Some people won't. So I wouldn't necessarily say that there is a big difference between recognition of domestic abuse within relationships within the LGBTQ community and everybody else. What I think is different is the response that people get when they come forward with that. And Jess did a really good presentation about how, as an agency, you would react if somebody came forward. And there is, within this, there's whole ideas to do with gender roles as well. So if somebody is in a relationship and it's a butch woman and a femme woman, how, if they were to go to the police, would the police necessarily respond to the fact that the perp is not the butch woman, but the femme woman? So I think structurally, there are a lot of issues that exist that we need to get to the bottom of. And I would say, you know, working with Kent Police, they've done an awful lot of work around this. And I do think that the service that will be offered is probably better than it was 5 years ago. That doesn't mean it's perfect. And I think for those of us, again, working within the field of domestic abuse, we may be really good at recognizing domestic abuse, but not necessarily the bolt-ons that come on with that. And that's about why we need to make sure that we have a person-centered approach to understanding the issues that people are presenting with and working with them to understand really what's going on, and then having a really good response and an appropriate response to that.
Oh, thank you so much, David. I don't know. I hope everybody has watched the recorded video Jessica sent to us. There are some powerful illustrations she gave about how agency, you know, view people who are not of the same. For example, if two women goes to the hospital and they will treat the woman as if she's not your partner, not knowing that she's your partner, because they've always recognized a partner as the opposite sex. So I think we should all go back and watch it again, and that would be very good for you as a practitioner to be able to implement it in your day-to-day contact with people. Thank you very much, David, for stepping in for Jessica. Now, my next question is for you, Amy. What sort of domestic abuse training are your local networks as charities able to provide? If it was available, what other training might they find helpful?
So, as you might have seen on the presentation, Age UK has got a network of lots of different local Age UKs. One of the standard services that's provided across all of those different charities is information and advice. So they will be skilled at delivering information in relation to domestic abuse. Not all of them would be in a position to offer training. It will depend on the size and the structure of those independent charities. But there is no harm in approaching them, because, like I say, they would have the skill set around that to have that conversation. If you're looking for training on domestic abuse and how it impacts on older people, and you can't get that from your local Age UK, I'm happy for you to be put in touch with me, and either myself or a member of my safeguarding team from the national charity can work with you to deliver that. In addition to I think the question said what other training might they find helpful. One of the other areas that we're looking at is around mental capacity for older people, and how that relates to people looking to have a lasting power of attorney, and what we need to understand about domestic abuse, coercive control, capacity, consent, and all of that, which is an issue for older people. So that's another area that you might want to think about in terms of training. But like I say, if your local charity isn't in a position to deliver that, because as you can imagine, they're quite busy at the moment, as are all charities, and they've all got a slightly different setup. So some of them might be 5 people, for example, and some of them might be 500. They really do differ in terms of what services they deliver. But if you can't get that from your local charity, your local Age UK, then I'm happy for you to make contact with me through the National Age UK, and I can work with you on that.
Well, thank you so much, Amy. And I hope many of our participants will take that opportunity. Thank you very much. This next question, I believe any member of the panel should be able to answer this, and please feel free to answer it. Training in health trust often consists of an hour online. What can we do not to just teach the basics, but give people the confidence to ask about domestic violence?
Could I just say, I think we actually need to take even a step back from that. And that is that we need to make sure that within organizations, there are policies and processes that encourage people to disclose, and then that managers are trained so that they can actually manage the disclosure safely. And we need to understand the impact of that disclosure on managers as well. Unless you've got that in place, I don't know that you can do anything else from there. So I would just say that there is an event on Tuesday of next week about making businesses DA prepped. Please book yourself in if you're interested in this, Andrea. Have a look at that, because there are some really good presentations coming from there. But as I say, you can talk about domestic abuse all you want, but unless you know what to do with it, unless you know how to manage it safely, there's no point doing it.
Oh, thank you so much, David. Is there any other person who wants to?
Can I add to that? Meena, you go first.
But thanks, Amy. I mean, I'm, as a trainer and doing training now for nearly 15 years, a lot of the training I've delivered has been to health trusts and frontline practitioners, as well as managers and seniors, like David has said. Routine inquiry has been put in place for a number of years now around DA. So that's the first thing. But secondly, one of the things I learned and I've picked up over the years from practitioners when I deliver training is that level of confidence, not just to ask, but it's also, what are you going to do with that level of information? We have very clear safeguarding procedures. We have very clear processes around designated safeguarding needs as well, depending on which sector, which area you work in. But the more I deliver training, and I've seen this over the past 12 months, in particular with the pandemic and lockdown, because it was about accessing clients, but also being able to refer them on to appropriate services, confidence levels also dropped. So it's thinking about that appropriate level of training, but also knowing what to do with it. And I think, just as echoing what David said, going back to those set policies and procedures. So how many of your organisations during lockdown in particular reviewed their safeguarding procedures?
Thank you so much, Meena, for that. That was really, really impactful. Amy?
Yeah, I was just going to add in that it is one of the things that we've, H.O.P.E has lobbied on in relation to the domestic abuse bill, is actually to include within the bill a requirement for training for health professionals, so that it isn't just that online training, because we know, and there's a question that we've got coming up about hidden victims. We know that so many of our victims and survivors of domestic abuse are hidden in so many ways, and that there's an opportunity there for health professionals to ask questions and, like Meena just said, then know what to do with that information. So it's been a really strong campaigning message from H.O.P.E is to make sure that it's pressed, you know, that we're taking that forward to say that this isn't just a nice to do, it's a must have, that frontline health professionals are trained in knowing how to respond to disclosures of domestic abuse.
Well, thank you so much. Yeah, come on, Elia.
I would add to that, I think, that if your employer is just providing you with an hour online training that just covers the basics, well, I mean, that's a pretty poor show, and you know, you should say that and you know, demand more if you can. But I guess you might have to do some things yourselves, which is, you know, seeking out the resource, you know, some specialist resources, some specialist services, inviting people to come and talk to you, joining together with other teams of workers to kind of, you know, get some dialogue going and try and train yourselves if your employer is not doing it. And certainly within the learning disability field, I would say, you know, there's not a lot of specialist resources out there, but there are some. So, and some of those are freely available, so you can look at them. And I think in my presentation, I put a list of kind of specialist organisations that you can contact for advice, and just ask them to, you know, can you come and talk to us, and can you advise us? Can you point us in the right direction? You have to be, I think you just have to take the initiative.
Absolutely, yes. I think that's the word. We all have to take initiative if we want to improve our knowledge in our area of specialty. Thank you very much. Now, the next question, I think this is going to be for you, Marilyn. It's something to do with the male refuge again. It says, there are no male refugees in Kent. Are you doing anything to look into the need for this in the country, in the county, yeah?
Yeah, so obviously Mankind, we don't deliver any refuges, we don't have any commissioned refuge services, but I do know that Kent County Council have recently, in the last couple of days, issued a questionnaire out to the public and to practitioners around the needs of services for men in the county. So hopefully the feedback from that and the results from that questionnaire will inform them as to what's needed, which obviously there is need for a refuge in Kent. I think currently the nearest refuge to Kent is Northampton. So hopefully with the feedback from that questionnaire, hopefully there will be some provision. And I know obviously I've had discussions with Clarion Housing around what they could do moving forward to accommodate men safely within the county. So nothing yet, and certainly nothing in concrete, but hopefully there'll be some provision in the future.
Good. Let me just keep this in. Like I said, everybody knows I work in the Women's Refuge. If you have a male refuge in Kent, let's say moving forward, do you think a woman can work in a male's refuge? I believe that's a yes.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. So obviously we on our helpline, we have all female call handlers, and we have about 2,500 callers a year. And there's probably just 1 or 2 a year men that actually ask to speak to a man. They don't tend to have an issue with talking to women, and a lot of men that I speak to and work with face to face say that actually they feel less ashamed by talking to a woman. They don't feel as judged. So they certainly don't make any issues around female workers within the refuges, and in the refuges that we are aware of and that obviously we've worked in and that we visit and support, the majority of them are run by women or have female staff.
On the flip side, what do you think? Can a man work in a women's refuge?
I've managed women's refuges previously, and I've not ever had any male staff. However, we have had men coming in, so workmen, etc., social workers, that type of thing, that have obviously visited the refuge. I think it depends on the women that are in there. Some women don't have a problem with it, and some women don't like it and feel afraid, or they have issues around it. So I think it depends on the individual situation at the time, really, at the people that are in there and their experiences.
Wow. I think it's a conversation that will keep going, isn't it? Yeah. And my next question is, thank you, Marilyn, for that. My next question is for Meena. Are there any statistics or records on the volume of Black Africans affected by forced marriage in the UK?
So one of the first things I'll say about data collection and commissioned services and statutory provisions or statutory services like the police or even social care, we're not the best at collecting protected characteristics, and in particular with regards to ethnicity. So we've had kind of a few reports out about why we need to get better at doing this. The agencies that I would refer you to, one of them that you can look on their website, they've done quite a lot of work, not just in the UK, but also looking at what's going on abroad, is Forward, which is www.forwarduk.org. The other thing that I always say to frontline practitioners working within or around forced marriages and H.O.P.E, the Forced Marriage Unit every year will release data on all the cases that they receive kind of annually. So, you know, at the moment, I think the most kind of last reported data was kind of just over 1,400 cases, but not only do they break it down with regards to focus countries. So in my presentation, I talked about Pakistan, Bangladesh, India, Afghanistan, Somalia, Iraq, and Romania. And the reason why they are listed, because they are what we classify as focus countries where we get the most referrals. That's not to say it's not happening to the Black community from Africa living in the UK or kind of migrating over here or you know, wherever they're based. But I think there's definitely something about data collection. So, you know, you have services that may be leading lights accredited by Safe Lives, and one of the things they are looked at or they're asked about is obviously the protected characteristics. They have to provide that as part of that accreditation. And, you know, commission services have to provide data to their commissioners as well. It's very different though, unless whether people publish that data and then they break down the DA categories. So it's not just thinking about CCB or thinking about that sexual kind of sexual abuse or violence, but how many of your services have had FGM cases, honour-based abuse and forced marriages, and then breaking it down by kind of gender, ethnicity, age, disability, and all of those parts. But how many of our services actually release that in their annual reports or even on their website? And I get it, people are busy, people have got a lot going on. We've seen a lot going on during lockdown, but also demographically, if you're working in a certain area, I would want to know, I'm based in Leicester, and if I'm working with a local service and I used to manage local DA services here, I would want to know who my community is, who am I actually dealing with, what am I working with? So that's just kind of my opinion on kind of on data collection, in particular around ethnicity.
Yeah.
Can I just add to that? Yeah, I totally agree with Meena on that. Obviously, our service in Somerset was very rural, and our commissioners set targets for how many people of certain ethnicities and with disabilities, how many men, etc., that we supported within the service, and we were very, very rarely able to achieve them because of the community that we live in. But I think it's right. I think it's, we need to have that data, and I think it's only fair that we share that data so that we know that actually we need to, our services need to meet the needs of the people around us, rather than a generic footprint for everyone throughout the country.
Good. Well, thank you. Right, I've got another question, and I believe anybody should be able to answer this. So I will appreciate contribution from the panel to this one. There is a constant criticism of the way that police deal with initial contact with domestic abuse victims or survivors, and missed opportunities to identify and manage risk to victims appropriately. With constant budget cuts affecting numbers of officers and available training, what is the best way for police forces to maintain a constant and accurate frontline response for victims? I think I'll be throwing this to David.
Thanks. I'd say locally in Kent and Medway, we're one of the few areas where there's been actually an uptick in the number of officers coming through the training school, because we paid for it with an increased council tax precept. So actually locally, the numbers of police have gone up, contrary to other areas. With that comes positives and minuses, because I think what can sometimes happen is that police can become either a blasé because this is the fifth domestic abuse incident that they've gone to that evening, or if they haven't actually become confident in their practice, they may avoid asking certain things. I think the criticism of the police can be fair, but I think we also need to acknowledge a lot of work has gone into actually how they are responding to victims. To me, it's something about empowering police to maintain their professional curiosity. So not looking at the dash, or as we use locally in Kent and Medway, the DARA, as just being a set of tick questions. Actually, what sits behind those ticks that you're putting or the notes that you're making, and not to make assumptions about the scene as you walk in. I'm not a police officer. I've never worked in law enforcement, so I feel like it's wrong for me to criticize or to critique what they're doing. But what I would just say is, don't assume. If something doesn't seem right, ask the question. Create an environment where you walk in that you're open to talk about anything. So, don't close down. Literally, you can see some people hiding behind notebooks at times when they're asking questions that might feel uncomfortable. Be aware of your body language, because that then is reflected in the kind of environment that you set. And again, just don't prejudge. Don't make any kind of assumption about the incident that you're attending.
Thank you, David. Yes, Meena?
I just want to add to what David was saying. I totally agree, David. So since 2016, kind of 16, 17, even prior to that, College of Policing, Safe Lives and Women's Aid have had a national programme called Domestic Abuse Matters, which has been rolled out to a number of forces, not all forces as yet, but it has been rolled out. So they are getting specific training, in particular to coercive and controlling behaviour, but very much from the victim's point of view and the victim or survivor's kind of angle. It's something that I've been delivering in a number of forces on behalf of Safe Lives, and a number of associates across England and Wales have been delivering it. And one of the things that you definitely pick up in a training room when you're delivering to officers, so you're dealing with first responders, inspectors, sergeants, call handlers, is that notion what David was saying. So thinking about that professional judgment, professional curiosity, just really looking at it from that survivor's perspective for both women and men that they're dealing with. And also really thinking about that multi-agency approach, what other agencies are out there that they can support with, and really stop asking that question, why does the survivor keep going back? So really kind of think about what are some of those barriers that are put in place. So Domestic Abuse Matters is a national programme. If anyone wants to have a look, if you just kind of Google it, and it's on the Safe Lives website, they've also collected data from officers within kind of the first 2 to 3 years, and you can see the feedback that they've received. And we also do a champions training where we then train up officers to be police champions within their organisation to be able to give that feedback to other officers, kind of kind of very kind of freely, but they've been trained in order to do that.
One thing as well that we have, and this is larger than domestic abuse, Michelle, sorry for jumping in there. We have student officers come through and spend time with us. So they can actually, back in the days when we could leave the house, they would go out and do community engagement. They would sit and listen to our initial response officers as they spoke to victims as we made that first contact, because they could then get a better perspective about the ideas that, or the experience of victims and survivors, when they've never been asked to become a victim of crime. They've never been asked to be brought into this process. It's a whole process that they don't understand. So maybe it gives them a little bit of an idea about the language that they could use to somebody. Don't believe that an acronym is widely known if it exists within professional policing. Just try and break that down a bit. And we get really good feedback. We often find that people, when they do their feedback, they didn't really want to come and spend time with us because they didn't see the worth. And then by the end of the 4 days, we get really great feedback, and they go away and they become a victim's ambassador within their, at the start of their career, and then within the station that they're based at.
Thanks, David. Professor Michelle.
Yes, I mean, I would certainly echo all of those things, but as well as training on domestic abuse, the police also need training on identifying people who've got, for example, a learning disability, because in the research that I did with my colleagues, we specifically asked them that, what kind of training do you get? What kind of training do you get in communicating with somebody with a learning disability? The answer was like practically nothing. And even as stepping back from that, we asked them, how would you even know if, for example, a woman had a learning disability? If you get a call, a domestic violence call, and you turn up, how would you know whether somebody had a learning disability? Because, I mean, you can't always tell by looking. Sometimes you can, but often you can't. You can't tell by looking. Somebody's kind of, if somebody's kind of upset and traumatized anyway, their speech might not be clear, or they might be hesitant in what they're saying. That doesn't indicate a learning disability. And so we asked them, how would you identify it? And the answers were, well, often they wouldn't know. So, they can't put any kind of, give any special kind of considerations to that because they don't know in the first place. Some people just said things like, well, I would perhaps ask, if I thought they might have, I might ask what school they went to, and then if it was a special school, and then I would know that they had a learning disability. Which is, on the one hand is it's a creative way, but it doesn't take into account the fact that many people, particularly with a mild learning disability, these days don't go to special schools anymore. They're, education is integrated. They'll be in a mainstream school, so that wouldn't be the kind of indicator that you might have expected it to be. So I think there's a lot of work to be done there, for sure.
Good. Thank you so much, Professor Michelle. Right. The next question, I believe probably Professor Michelle can take this, or if there's anyone that want to contribute to this. I'm doing a Master's in Science in Addiction and Counseling. What will be the one most important question I could pose to a client that may be suffering domestic abuse?
I don't know.
Do you understand the question? Yeah. I think the person is doing a Master's in Addiction and Counseling, and clearly the person has no DA training. So maybe I could just answer by saying, get yourself trained in domestic abuse. And then probably by the time you get your first basic, and we have a lot of training going on right now during this webinar throughout this week till the 10th, probably if you come on it, you might be able to get an answer to that. So get yourself in foundation basic knowledge in domestic abuse, and that will really be a good start off to have a convenient conversation with your client.
Just one thing I would add to that. I don't think there is one question, because there's not one type of victim or survivor. I don't think, and I can see the value of the question and where the question's going. It's how can I help?
Yeah.
But I think how to help is to recognise that every person and every person's experience is going to be really different to one another. So it's about understanding what that person's experience is and what they want the outcome to be. What changes do they want to see? But you can't just ask that. It comes through a relationship and through building trust. So it's not as easy as asking one question. Unfortunately, I wish it was. it's a long-term building that relationship and understanding the person and their needs.
And
Yes,
I would just say what you can do, though, is advocate to make an environment where domestic abuse can be discussed.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah. In fact, that's why we're saying domestic abuse is everybody's business. You don't even have to be masters in anything. We can start from as little as we can and make it a general day-to-day language, isn't it? Right. The next question. Anyone can answer this. How can you identify and break through barriers to enable hidden victims to better seek support? There are a lot of hidden victims, and I believe any one of us can answer it. There are hidden victims with people with learning disabilities, hidden victims in the Age UK category, and hidden victims in the minorities in forced marriage, and a lot of hidden victims. So I believe any one of us should be able to help us. And if I can refer back to the webinar this morning that David was the moderator on, that is a hidden victim, So let us keep the conversation going. Who wants to answer that question? How can we identify and break through barriers to enable hidden victims to better seek support? David.
Okay, I'll go. I'd say one of the things is about language. I was on a call yesterday and somebody used the word homosexual as opposed to gay or bi or lesbian or gay or whatever. And I just thought, my God, it came as such a shock because it isn't a word that I would use. And it isn't a word that I hear used within the LGBTQ plus community. And I just thought, oh God, I'm being pathologized based on sexuality. Straight away, that would shut me down from seeking support from an agency because they're saying there and then that they're not open, they're not modern. And Jess gave a list of some issues. And one of the big things was about making sure that you're, as an organization, up to date with some of the terminology that's used within the communities that you're looking to serve. So for me, it is actually about breaking down the barriers because that became a barrier to seeking support.
That's correct.
In terms of just how you're presenting yourself, the front door of you as an organization, especially at a time of COVID where everything is online, to make sure that you do those little things that can actually say to somebody, it's okay, they'll understand what I'm talking about. Because if you're already feeling that you can't come forward as a victim of domestic abuse because of everything else that sits behind you as somebody who is subject to perpetrator behavior, to then have to think, well, not only am I going to have to explain my experience, but I'm going to almost have to justify my existence, my relationship, and for fear of being judged. It's a massive barrier. And I think that there are some structural issues as well that relate to gender in terms of accessing support for male victims of domestic abuse as well, whether they be part of the gay community, MSM community, bi community, cisgendered or heterosexual, it doesn't matter. Gender does also play a role, again, in terms of barriers to access.
That's good. I was listening to Jessica's webinar yesterday, and she said something that really triggered my thought. For example, a lady called into maybe a 101 or called into a domestic abuse helpline and said, I've been abused. The first question the person could ask was, is he your husband? He can be a partner, probably we should drop the word of saying husband or wife. It could be your partner. And also it could be intimate member of the family as well. So I think that is really important. Yeah, that's true. The word we use is important. Thank you, David.
I'm often asked about my wife, and it's quite interesting hearing people's reactions when you say, no, husband, actually.
Oh, dear. Yes, Professor Michelle.
Again, following on from language, I would say for people with learning disabilities, you need to make information accessible. And that means communicating with people in different ways. So much of the information about domestic abuse is written information. And many people with learning disabilities have literacy problems. They either don't read very well or some can't read at all. And so kind of standard written information is not gonna hit the mark for them. So you need easy read information, which is kind of, much smaller amounts of text, easy plain English language. accompanied by pictures to kind of trying to illustrate what the points that you're getting across. You need video information for people. So you need kind of alternative forms of information. And again, particularly, during COVID, everything online, that includes your websites as well. It's not just, kind of leaflet that you might produce to send out to places. Really everything that you're writing, if you want to make it accessible to that group of people, you've got to think about it. And there are, you could have a go at that yourself if you want to, but actually there are groups of people with learning disabilities who actually kind of offer a service where they will make information accessible for you. So you can give them the kind of, your copy, if you like, and they will produce an easy read a leaflet or booklet or whatever it is from that. So there is help out there to make information accessible.
Oh, that's wonderful. That's good. Thank you. Well, we'll keep having questions coming. This question says, is there training for when working with a perpetrator? Who can answer that question? Is there training for when working with the perpetrator? Yes, Meena.
So some of the recent training that I've been on around working with perpetrators, and there are a number of providers that are offering this. I'm not trying to promote one particular provider, but the work that I've been doing in particular has been with a service called the Drive Project, which are hosted by Respect and Safe Lives and a number of other services. So at the moment, I do know they've got some training that's actually on their website that people can access, that they've now gone from kind of the classroom to online. And just thinking about when working with the perpetrator, because it's not just kind of one dynamic, it's thinking about, different forms of kind of family violence as well that you may be kind of approached with. And some of the work that we've actually been doing within the H.O.P.E network is looking at those within Black, Asian or minority ethnic communities that are using abusive behaviours. And I'm not just talking about honour-based violence or forced marriage, but I'm also talking about coercive control and other forms of domestic abuse. We've actually ran a survey with Suffolk University, and we're trying to really look at the recommendations. And one of the things that we found when we asked men and women in the community who identified as Black or Asian or minority ethnic, what would you want to see within that perpetrator sector? One of the things that they did tell us is they don't see a good representation of workers, so they don't see themselves in that sector. So if you are delivering perpetrator programs or working with those who are using abusive behaviours, just also think about your own staff cohort that are delivering these groups or are delivering it on a one-to-one, whether it's kind of that court-based perpetrator program or community-based perpetrator programs. But there are a number of programs that are going on across England and Wales as well.
Thank you, Meena. Thank you. The next question, it says to David. David, do you have much involvement with domestic abuse training for frontline police officers? And also, is this a mandatory training for the police?
The short answer is no. We aren't involved in delivering DA training. However, the other providers in Kent are involved. And so they do sit as part of the training program for New Kent police officers. If you were lucky enough to catch Tina Alexander last night from Oasis, Tina does quite a lot of delivery to frontline officers, not just as they start with the force, but as part of their continuing professional development. But for us as victim support, no, we don't sit as part of that training. What we do provide, though, is support for some of the continuing professional development days, not just around domestic abuse, but around hate crime, stalking, that kind of stuff as well.
Okay, well, thank you so much for that question. The next question says, that's for you, Meena. I was watching your recorded video yesterday, and you said something. You said, can you expatiate on it? What you mean by don't underestimate the one chance rule?
Yeah, so it's really simple, and it's pretty much kind of what it says on the tin. It's thinking about if you have one chance to speak to a potential victim, that may only have been one chance to actually save their lives. And what it means that all practitioners, whether you're working in statutory agencies or within the charitable sector, you need to be aware of your responsibilities and obligations when you come across honour-based abuse or forced marriages or female genital mutilation. So it's regarding to that disclosure. If that victim is allowed to kind of walk away out that front door or kind of walk away from that disclosure without any support being offered, it could potentially mean that that one chance rule or that one chance of opportunity has been wasted. And actually you can use a very similar concept in domestic abuse cases, you know, for white women or kind of for black women, because it's thinking about the levels of risk that you are dealing with when someone is making that disclosure. And the kind of the prime example is what I used in my presentation around Banaz Mahmood's case with regards to the disclosures and the number of disclosures that she had made to the police, she had made while she was sitting within A&E, you know, and her then boyfriend was kind of filming her speaking in Kurdish, telling them what had particularly happened. And then a number of weeks later, Banaz's body was found in Birmingham. So I cannot emphasize, you know, your one chance rules is really the way to think about it. It's kind of your do's and your don'ts. You know, what would you do if someone's making that disclosure? What would you follow? And just kind of being really mindful. Do not underestimate when you have women and men and children telling you their lived experience. You know, I always say, I am not an expert in domestic abuse, honour-based violence or forced marriages. The experts that I have met have been all those survivors over the 15 years that I've worked with who have told me their stories and their journeys. And don't forget that when you're working with them.
Thank you so much for that. That is so good. I think what I will add to it is we should sharpen our professional judgment and also, you know, professional curiosity, you know, and also develop our confidence in managing such chance rule. I think that's all we need, you know. And I believe there are a lot of trainings on professional curiosity so that you will be confident enough to deal with such situation when you fall into such. Thank you for that, Meena. Now, this next question is for you, Marilyn. Are there any good examples of online person-to-person sources of advice, guidance targeted at male victims in the UK? Any good examples?
Yeah, so I think obviously at the moment, under the current conditions within the pandemic, majority of domestic abuse services throughout the UK are offering online meetings rather than face-to-face meetings. So, you know, your local outreach service or IDVA service that support men, the majority of them do now support both men and women, or they have a service attached to their IDVA service that will support men, will be offering online stuff. If it's something that's such as a recovery or pattern changing program, I know there's some locally in different areas of the country, but we also at Mankind offer an online pattern changing course that men can access. So they can contact us. Obviously, our details are out there in our presentation. So we do that via Zoom currently, one evening a week. And obviously that depends whether you're accessing it as an individual, whether services are looking to commission that. But I think there's quite a bit out there. And in terms of finding out where those services are for men, if you access our Mankind website, we have for professionals a portal, the MDAN portal, which we developed with Hestia, to basically give a national directory of services that you can filter down by area or by specialism. And it also has the details on there for refuge and safe house provision. So if you're looking for a local service that men can access online, that's on there. And obviously all the other information for men around keeping safe, if it's a victim or survivor themselves, around what they can do. They can read case studies and other people's stories and watch videos and stuff on there. So there's lots of information on our website. And I know Respect obviously do the same. They have a similar setup where they've got access to their training and other case studies.
Thank you, Marie. Now it's just 1 minute to 3 o'clock. If you are happy for me to go ahead, panel, do you want me to just take the very last question? Thank you. Thank you. Now this question is for you, Michelle. I'm really sorry. I might not be able to take the rest of the questions. I think some of it has been touched one way or the other. Michelle, this is for you. I will just add 10 more minutes for also our participants, just 10 more minutes, and we'll be ready to go. In my experience with working in the learning disability field, there seems to be a reluctance from professionals to recognize domestic abuse in the group of people. Will you agree? Does this add a barrier to accessing help for people with learning disability? That's for you, Professor Michelle.
Okay. Well, of course, it would be a barrier for sure. You know, if people are reluctant to acknowledge it and to see it, then that is clearly a barrier. I don't know that I've much experience with professionals kind of reluctant to see it. So that, I mean, because to me that suggests they can see it and they know what's going on, but they don't want to acknowledge it, they don't want to take it further. I wouldn't say I was that familiar with that. What I'm more familiar with is an inability to see it. So they don't understand the dynamics of domestic abuse. They don't understand what some of the what I might say obvious red flags might be. They don't see that. They don't understand it. I'll just give a very quick example. I know time is tight, but for example, I've had people say to me, if a woman with learning disabilities is in a relationship with a man, especially if he doesn't have learning disabilities, and say, oh, he's so supportive. He's always with her. He accompanies her to every appointment. He goes with her to the midwife. He's all of those things. And so he's lovely. He's so supportive. And yes, he might be, and that might be great, but it also might not be. And it might be he's making sure she never gets an opportunity to talk to anybody by herself because he's always there. So just even questioning certain forms of behavior, I think, certainly within the learning disability field, people are just not kind of primed to do that terribly well. I mean, I could go on, but I'm aware we've gone past 3 o'clock now, so probably should stop.
I think Amy just put a question there. She said, this is something that Age UK is requesting to be included in the domestic abuse bill. So thank you so much for that. And we'll look out for that. And hopefully that will be another good news. Wow, I wish we could continue over and over again, but I would like to say thank you so much to Louisa Janu for helping with the question. Thank you so much, wonderful Louisa. Thank you, Meena. Thank you, Amy. Thank you, Professor Michelle. Thank you, David, for stepping in for Jessica. And our wonderful Marilyn Selwood. We are holding you into account to get us a refuge for men in Kent. Right, now, well, thank you so much to all our panel. That was absolutely fantastic, and I'm sure something we will all be going away thinking about. Thanks to everyone who have asked questions. Thank you. That really added to the conversation. Without your questions, there is no way we'll keep going. So thank you so much for dropping the question. And for those, if you have not watched the webinar, please, I will advise you to go and watch it and give it more thumbs up on YouTube. A recording of this webinar will be made available to you very shortly. If you enjoyed this event, please do note that there is still time to register for the upcoming webinars, so your conference journey doesn't need to end here. Go to www.daeverybodiesbusiness.org to register. We can also keep the conversation going with the hashtag, for those who have the Twitter handle or any social network, hashtag #DAEverybodiesBusiness and hashtag #NoSeeSpeakOut. If the talk today has raised anything with you personally and you would like to find out more about the services available, please visit www.domesticabuseservices.org.uk, where you can find out more about how to refer into your local service. And from me, Dupsy Olutufeshe, I say thank you very much for coming for today and have a wonderful, wonderful weekend. And remember, it's Black Friday, so maybe you can go down and treat yourself to some nice shopping. Thank you, everybody. Goodbye.
Thank you. Bye.
Okay.